The wedding planner asked if we needed 2 bridal suites. I said no, 1 would be enough. What I didn't say was that only one of us was actually getting married, and why Sister Julia stood behind me in the mirror, adjusting my veil with the kind of careful precision she'd use to handle evidence. You know, she said, her voice honey sweet, if this were my wedding, I'd probably go with something more dramatic. The seamstress looked confused. But miss, this is her wedding. Julia's laugh was like breaking glass. Of course it is. I just meant, hypothetically. I watched her reflection, memorizing the way her fingers lingered on the fabric that would never be hers. The way she angled herself to catch the light. The way she practiced her smile for photos that would never exist. My name is Melissa. I'm 28 * and I've learned that some people will steal your spotlight even when they're not invited to the stage. Growing up, Julia was 3 years older and infinitely better at everything that mattered to our parents. While I brought home honor roll certificates, she brought home stories. While I practiced piano, she practiced charm. The difference was that charm gets you remembered, and good grades just get you expected to be even better next time. Learned early that my achievements were just stepping stones to make Julia's mediocrity look like brilliance. When I got accepted to college with a full scholarship, Dad's first words were, "Julia's going to feel so bad about her community college decision." When I landed my first real job, Mom worried it would make Julia feel inadequate about her retail position. But it was my engagement announcement that finally showed me the family hierarchy in crystal clarity. "You told Julia first, right?" Dad asked before congratulating me. "She's going to be sensitive about this." I hadn't told Julia first. I'd barely told anyone. David and I had decided to keep it quiet until we figured out our timeline. But somehow, within an hour of our announcement, the conversation had shifted from celebrating us to managing Julia's feelings about us. "Maybe you two could share the entrance," Mom suggested over coffee the next morning. As a way of honoring the bond between sisters. Julia's always dreamed of walking down an aisle in white. I stirred my coffee, watching the cream swirl into nothing. "Share the entrance to my own wedding? It's just a walk, sweetheart. The important part is the marriage. Right?" Julia appeared in the kitchen doorway like she'd been waiting for her cue. "I heard you talking about the wedding. I have so many ideas." She poured herself coffee and sat down uninvited. "I've been thinking about this day since we were little." "Your wedding day?" I asked. "Both of our wedding days," she corrected, but her eyes said something different. Started keeping notes that morning. Not because I planned to use them, but because silence has a way of making you forget what actually happened. And I had a feeling I was going to need to remember everything exactly as it was. If this were Julia's wedding, it would be an event. I heard Dad tell Mom later that evening. She knows how to make things special. Maybe I'd always been the shadow because they never let the light touch me. Or maybe I'd been so busy being good that I forgot to be memorable. Either way, Julia had already started planning a wedding that wasn't hers, and everyone seemed to think that was perfectly normal. I called David that night. "We need to talk about the wedding," I said. "Everything okay?" I looked at my notebook. Already 3 pages deep with quotes and timestamps. Define okay. The dinner meeting happened at Olive Garden because Julia said fancy restaurants made her feel judged. We ordered appetizers nobody wanted and pretended this was a normal family discussion about wedding planning. "We want to help with costs," Dad announced, cutting straight to business. "Your mother and I discussed it, and we'd like to contribute significantly." David reached for my hand under the table. "That's incredibly generous." "There's just one small thing," Mom added, her voice careful. "Julia should walk first. In white. Just to, well, she needs this memory." "I'm sorry, what?" I set down my breadstick. "It's symbolic," Julia explained, leaning forward with that practiced enthusiasm she used when pitching bad ideas. Sisters. Sharing the most important moment. Like, how beautiful is that? David's grip on my hand tightened. Julia walking down the aisle, at Melissa's wedding, in a wedding dress. Not a wedding dress, Mom corrected quickly. A white dress. Something elegant. She'll go first, then step aside when Melissa makes her entrance. Nobody will even notice the transition. Everyone will notice, I said quietly. Why would they notice? Julia's voice had an edge now. It's not like I'd be doing anything dramatic. I'd just be there. For you. As your sister. The way she said "for you" made it sound like charity. Dad pulled out his phone and started showing us photos of wedding venues. We're thinking somewhere. With a long aisle. Really dramatic. Julia's always had great stage presence. I excused myself to the bathroom and called David's voicemail from the stall. This is insane, right? I'm not crazy? This is completely insane? When I came back, they were discussing photographers. We'll need someone who can capture the sister entrance beautifully, Mom was saying. It's such a unique concept. Unique. David repeated slowly. Julia was scrolling through her phone, showing pictures of white dresses to our parents. This one's perfect, right? Elegant but not too bridal. I don't want to upstage Melissa. Everything about her tone suggested she absolutely wanted to upstage me. What if we just think about this? I suggested. What's to think about? Dad asked. We're offering to pay for your dream wedding. The only condition is including your sister in a meaningful way. By having her pretend to be a bride. By honoring your relationship, Mom corrected. I looked at David. He was staring at his water glass like it might contain answers. We appreciate the offer, he said finally. Can we have some time to discuss it? Of course, Julia said, smiling. Like she'd already won. Take all the time you need. I'll just keep looking at dresses, just in case. In the car afterward, David was quiet for the first 5 miles. Say something, I finally asked. I'm thinking. About what? He pulled into our driveway and turned off the engine. About whether we should take their money. And? About whether we can use this. I wasn't sure what he meant, but something in his voice made me think we weren't going to be the victims in this story after all. The key is making them think they're in control, David explained over breakfast, spreading wedding venue brochures across our kitchen table. They want to pay for Julia's fantasy wedding? Let them. They just don't need to know what they're actually paying for. Within a week, my parents had transferred the first payment. $25,000 for venue, catering, and photography. Julia texted me hourly with dress options, each one more bride-like than the last. I found the perfect one, she announced, barging into my apartment with shopping bags. Look at this. She held up a floor-length white gown with intricate beadwork. And a subtle train. It was stunning. It was also completely inappropriate for a sister walking down someone else's wedding aisle. Julia, that's a wedding dress. It's an evening gown that happens to be white, she corrected. Very different. It has a train. A tiny train. Barely noticeable. I watched her hold it up to herself in my hallway mirror, tilting her head and practicing expressions. She looked like she was already married to someone invisible. When's the last time you were in a serious relationship? I asked. Her reflection faltered for half a second. What does that have to do with anything? Nothing. Just wondering. I date, she said defensively. I just haven't found anyone worth keeping yet. She folded the dress carefully back into its bag, but I caught her taking a selfie with it when she thought I wasn't looking. That afternoon, Mom called with updates. On the venue tour. The coordinator says the aisle is 40 feet long, perfect for a dramatic entrance. And Julia was right about the lighting. It'll photograph beautifully. When did Julia talk to the coordinator? Oh, she came with us to look at the space. She had such wonderful ideas about positioning and timing. Very theatrical mind, your sister. I found David in our bedroom, on his laptop with a spreadsheet open. Good news, he said without looking up. Your parents just approved the upgraded photography package. How upgraded? 2 photographers, videographer, drone footage, and a photo booth. Plus professional editing and a highlight reel. For what? He looked up with a smile that made me nervous. For the most well-documented wedding disaster in family history. I sat down next to him. What are you planning? I'm not planning anything. I'm just preparing for all possible outcomes. His phone buzzed with a text from Julia. Can we do a rehearsal? I want the walk to be perfect for Melissa's special day. David showed me the message. She's been texting me directly now. Very helpful, actually. Helpful how? Evidence, he said simply. Everything's being documented. Every conversation, every demand, every assumption. And the more involved she gets in planning your wedding, the more obvious it becomes what she actually wants. That night, Julia posted an Instagram story of herself in the white dress, mirror selfie style, with the caption, "Sister wedding prep vibes, some dreams are worth sharing." She tagged me in it. 43 people liked it in the first hour. She's not even trying to hide it anymore, I told David. Good, he said. Makes our job easier. Your fiancé seems very understanding, Mom commented during a family dinner at their house. It's refreshing to see a man who doesn't get territorial about wedding planning. David smiled modestly from across the table. I just want Melissa to be happy. If including Julia makes her happy, then I'm all for it. See? Julia beamed. He gets it. This is about love and family, not ego. What they didn't know was that David had suggested we move all the real planning conversations off. Text messages. Melissa's been stressed about people reading over her shoulder, he'd told my parents. Could we keep the detailed planning discussions verbal? Just until after the wedding? They'd agreed immediately. After all, what bride wants her family seeing her bridezilla moments? What they also didn't know was that I'd personally visited the venue coordinator 3 days earlier. Alone. Without David, without my parents, without anyone who might mention it later. I need to make a small change to the ceremony timeline, I'd told her calmly. The processional order needs to be adjusted. Only the bride walks. No one else. But your family mentioned, my family mentions a lot of things. I'm the one getting married. She'd made the change in her system. No documentation. No paper trail. Just a quiet conversation between 2 women who understood that sometimes the bride has to protect her own wedding. So while Julia texted me daily about dress fittings and hair appointments, and my parents called with vendor updates, David and I planned the actual wedding in our living room with cash transactions and face-to-face meetings with vendors who understood the unique nature of our situation. The beauty of no paper trail, David explained, is that when people's memories differ from reality, there's no evidence to contradict the truth. 3 weeks before the wedding, Julia's behavior shifted into overdrive. She started posting outfit of the day photos with captions like wedding prep mode activated and getting ready to celebrate love. Her friends began commenting things like, "You're going to be such a beautiful bride and can't wait to see you walk down that aisle." She wasn't correcting them. "Did you see her Instagram?" my friend Katie texted me. "People think she's getting married." I screenshot the post and added it to the folder on my phone labeled documentation. It was getting thick. The breaking point came when Julia showed up at my final dress fitting without invitation. I wanted to see how we'll look together, she announced to the seamstress. 4 photos. She'd brought the white dress. While I stood on the fitting platform in my actual wedding gown, she changed in the corner and emerged looking like a bride from a magazine. Beautiful, the seamstress said diplomatically. You both look lovely. Don't we? Julia positioned herself next to me in front of the 3-way mirror. Like we're both getting married on the same day. The seamstress looked confused but continued. Pinning my hem. Actually, Julia continued, could you take a photo of us together? For my mom? I watched her in the mirror, practicing poses, adjusting angles, finding her light. She looked radiant. She looked like she was already married to someone who loved her. Julia, I said quietly. What do you think is happening here? I think I'm supporting my little sister on the most important day of her life. By wearing a wedding dress to my wedding. It's not a wedding dress. Look in the mirror and tell me what you see. She looked. For a moment, something flickered across her face, maybe recognition, maybe shame. But then she smiled. I see 2 sisters sharing a beautiful moment. That night, David found me crying in our bathroom. Second thoughts, he asked gently. About marrying you? Never. About having a family? Every day. He sat on the edge of the bathtub. 3 more weeks. 3 more weeks until what? Until they find out what they actually paid for. Asterisk the morning of the wedding, Julia arrived at the venue in a white limousine she'd rented herself. She emerged wearing the dress, professional hair and makeup, and a smile that could power the building. Today's the day, she announced to everyone within hearing distance. I'm so excited I can barely contain myself. The wedding coordinator approached me in the bridal suite with a concerned expression. Melissa? There seems to be some confusion. The other woman in white claims she's walking down the aisle first? There is no other woman in white, I said calmly, adjusting my veil in the mirror. But she looks like a bride. I know. She's my sister. 20 minutes before the ceremony, David texted me, security is briefed. Your father's been informed of the actual plan. Everything's ready. I looked out the window and saw Julia posing for photos with distant relatives, practicing bouquet poses with flowers she'd brought herself. She looked genuinely happy. For maybe the first time in years, she looked like someone who believed she deserved beautiful things. I almost felt sorry for her. The music started. Through the window, I watched Julia line up at the back of the aisle, adjusting her dress one final time. She looked toward the doors where I was supposed to emerge, smiled, and began walking. She made it 6 steps before security quietly but firmly redirected her to a seat in the 3rd row. Excuse me, I heard her voice carry across the sudden silence. There's been a mistake. I'm supposed to walk first. Ma'am, please take your seat. But I am the bride. Julia's voice cracked as she said it, loud enough for every guest to hear. I rehearsed this. She promised I'd walk first. The silence that followed was deafening. 40 pairs of eyes turned to look at the woman in white being escorted away from the aisle she'd never been invited to walk. I watched Dad's face as he realized what was happening. He looked toward the bridal suite window where I was standing, and I saw the exact moment he understood that the wedding he'd paid for wasn't the wedding Julia had promised him. The music started again. This time, it was my cue. I walked down that aisle alone, past 40 guests who had just witnessed my sister being escorted to her seat in a wedding dress, past my father who had refused to stand when I appeared, past my mother who was whispering frantically to people around her. David was waiting at the altar with a smile that told me everything had gone exactly according to plan. When I reached him, I turned slightly toward the guests and said, just loud enough for the first few rows to hear, some people confuse an aisle with a stage. You look beautiful, he whispered when I faced him again. Behind me, I could hear Julia's voice, increasingly desperate. This wasn't supposed to happen. She was supposed to go second. This isn't right. But I didn't turn around. I'd spent 28 years looking over my shoulder at Julia's needs, Julia's feelings, Julia's dreams. Today, I looked forward. The ceremony proceeded without further interruption, but the tension in the room was thick enough to cut. Julia sat rigidly in her white dress, occasionally dabbing at her eyes while relatives whispered around her. During cocktail hour, my parents cornered David near the bar. "What the hell just happened?" Dad demanded in a voice that carried further than he intended. "A wedding," David replied calmly, sipping his beer. "Melissa's wedding, specifically." "You lied to us." "About what?" "About Julia walking down the aisle. About the shared entrance. About everything we discussed." David looked genuinely confused. "I don't recall agreeing to Julia walking down the aisle at our wedding. In fact, I don't recall that ever being a real conversation. We planned this whole thing around what? Around letting your other daughter play dress up at Melissa's wedding? Around funding Julia's fantasy while Melissa just, what? Disappeared?" Mom stepped forward. "That's not fair. We were trying to include both our daughters in Melissa's wedding. To me, where only one of your daughters is actually getting married." I watched this conversation from across the room, accepting congratulations from David's family while my own family imploded near the open bar. David's elderly aunt approached me with a glass of champagne and a knowing smile. "That was quite the entrance drama, dear." "Family dynamics can be complicated," I replied, taking the champagne. "Indeed. Though I must say," she glanced toward where Julia sat sulking in her white dress, "it's fascinating how silence can make more noise than someone screaming, isn't it?" I smiled and raised my glass. "To peaceful weddings. To brides who know the difference between sharing and surrendering," she corrected. "She's been planning this for months," Mom continued. "The dress, the hair, the entrance. She's been so excited. About my wedding? About being part of something beautiful. She can be part of it as a guest. In a guest-appropriate outfit. Like everyone else who isn't getting married today." Julia appeared at Dad's elbow, still in the white dress but now with mascara stains on her cheeks. "David, can we talk? I think there's been a misunderstanding." "There's no misunderstanding, Julia. This is Melissa's wedding. You're welcome to celebrate with us as her sister, but you're not part of the ceremony. But you planned. Without consulting the people actually getting married." She looked around desperately, as if someone might step in and fix this for her. When no one did, her voice got smaller. "I just wanted to feel special for one day." "Then plan your own wedding," David said gently but firmly. "To someone who actually wants to marry you." The silence that followed was brutal. Julia left during dinner, while David and I were cutting the cake. She didn't say goodbye to anyone. Just walked out in her white dress while everyone pretended not to notice. "She'll be back," Mom predicted. "She just needs time to process." But when I looked toward the exit, I saw Julia through the window, taking selfies by the venue sign in her wedding dress, posting them with captions I couldn't read but could easily imagine. Some people don't know the difference between being special and being seen. Julia had spent so long demanding to be noticed that she'd forgotten to become someone worth noticing. Danced my first dance as a married woman while my sister performed her own wedding fantasy in the parking lot for an audience of Instagram followers who would forget her posts by morning. 3 days into our honeymoon, the hotel concierge delivered a package to our room. No return address, but I recognized the handwriting on the label immediately. Inside was the white dress Julia had worn to my wedding, carefully folded with a note pinned to the bodice. "You stole the day that should have been mine. I hope you're happy." David photographed the note, the dress, the packaging. "Evidence," he said simply. "Evidence of what?" "That this isn't over for her." He was right. By the time we returned from our honeymoon, Julia had crafted an entire narrative on social media about being excluded from her own sister's wedding and heartbroken by family betrayal. She'd posted photos of herself in the white dress with increasingly dramatic captions about sibling jealousy and wedding sabotage. Her friends were eating it up. The comments were full of supportive outrage. "You looked more like a bride than she did," and "Some people can't handle sharing the spotlight." And "Family jealousy is the worst kind." "She's rewriting history," I told David, scrolling through her posts. Let her. Everyone who was actually there knows what happened. But that was the thing about Julia, she'd always been better at telling stories than living truth. Within a month, her version of events had become the family's accepted reality. I was the jealous sister who couldn't bear to share attention. She was the victim who'd only wanted to celebrate love. When Mom called to suggest a family healing session, I finally understood what David had meant about evidence. "I think you owe your sister an apology," Mom began. "For what?" "For humiliating her at your wedding. For making her feel unwelcome. For Mom, Julia showed up to my wedding in a wedding dress and tried to walk down the aisle before me. She was trying to honor your sisterhood. She was trying to be the bride at someone else's wedding. That's not how she tells it." "I know. But that's what happened." The conversation ended with Mom hanging up on me. 6 months later, Julia announced her engagement to a man she'd been dating for 3 weeks. The wedding was planned for 8 months out, a timeline that would put it exactly 1 year after mine. Coincidence? David asked when I showed him the Instagram announcement. With Julia? Nothing's ever a coincidence. I blocked her number that day. Then her social media accounts. Then the family members who kept trying to mediate our misunderstanding. Sometimes the loudest thing you can do is simply stop listening. Julia got her dream wedding eventually, white dress, long aisle, all the attention she'd ever wanted. I know because the photos made it to my feed through mutual friends. She looked radiant. She looked like someone who'd finally gotten everything she'd ever wanted. The marriage lasted 4 months. I never sent a card, never reached out, never offered comfort when the divorce was finalized. Not because I was cruel, but because I'd finally learned the difference between family and people who happen to share your DNA. 2 weeks after Julia's divorce was finalized, my cousin Sarah called me. "I probably shouldn't tell you this," she began, but Julia called me last Thursday. She was drunk and still wearing her wedding dress. The one from her actual wedding, not yours. She kept apologizing to it. Apologizing to the dress? To the dress, to the mirror, to whoever would listen. She kept saying she should have just been happy for you. That she ruined everything by wanting what wasn't hers. I held the phone in silence for a long moment. "Did you say anything back?" I asked. "What was there to say?" "Some lessons you have to learn alone." David and I celebrated our first anniversary. Quietly, just the two of us, with no drama and no audience. It was perfect. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. Sometimes it's just finally choosing your own peace over everyone else's chaos. I haven't spoken to Julia in 2 years. I don't miss the drama, the manipulation, or the constant need to manage her feelings about my life. I miss who I thought she was when we were children, before I realized that some people will always see your happiness as something stolen from them. But that's her loss, not mine. If this story reminded you of someone in your own family, maybe even yourself, know that you don't have to keep feeding dynamics that drain you. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is simply stop participating.